This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel, broadcasting remotely. Public school students in Connecticut join millions of others who will continue with online or distance learning for the rest of the academic year. Coming up, we talk with the head of the largest teachers union in Connecticut and the state education commissioner about what this means for students, educators, and parents. Will there be summer school, and how should schools prepare for opening eventually this fall? You can join the conversation, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Now, in a couple of weeks, Governor Ned Lamont's closure order will expire. Many questions remain over how certain businesses like restaurants or hair salons will operate during this pandemic. For perspective on this whole issue of reopening, joining us now on Zoom is Alice Park. She's national health correspondent for Time magazine. Alice, welcome to our show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
You wrote a recent piece about the questions about reopening. You started the piece talking about one of Japan's most northernmost islands. What happened there when we saw officials easing social distancing?
Well, I think that what happened in Hokkaido, an island in Japan, is really illustrative of what we might be facing here in the United States as we continue this gradual march toward reopening and hopefully getting back to some semblance of normalcy. They did a really good job. They did everything right on Hokkaido. They were able to test people. They were able to ask people to stay home and to limit the spread of the virus. And their cases started coming down. So when that happened, the governor decided to reopen the society. Businesses were suffering, as you can imagine, as they are here in the United States. They rely a lot on agriculture and tourism there, and those businesses and industries were suffering. And so the governor decided to reopen. Unfortunately, when he did, cases started to skyrocket again. Believe that at one point they went up by as much as 80% compared to when everyone was under lockdown. So they were faced with a very difficult decision of having to reinstitute the social distancing and lockdown and social isolation policies. So that's really, I think, a lesson for the rest of the world as we really try to wrestle with this conflict between the very real pressures from public health and trying to contain this virus and keep the virus from spreading, and the very real issues of people being able to make a living and economies faltering and being compromised. So we need to be very careful when we talk about reopening and use examples like Hokkaido. It also happened in Germany, Singapore, and Hong Kong. And we have to really look to those cases to better understand how we can reopen in a responsible way and try to meet as many of these conflicting needs as we can.
You're pointing to this tension between what public health officials and experts are saying and the tension that politicians are facing, hearing from constituents, looking at how the economy is really being impacted poorly. People are worried about their finances and worried about how they're going to get food on the table. When you talk about these other countries, there's a lot of attention here, Alice, on how testing is inadequate. When these countries started to reopen, what did their testing capabilities look like?
Their testing capabilities, I think, on the whole, were much better than ours have been. Ours is improving day by day, week by week, as Dr. Fauci has said. It is getting better. We did falter, and so I think the issue with the United States is that we were really playing catch up for a while because we hadn't had the testing infrastructure in place to really do the amount of testing that we needed to get a handle on who was infected and where the infections were. But it is getting better. And I think it's going to be key to make sure that that testing capability is up and running and solid and robust. And those are one of the factors that each governor, each municipality is going to have to look at, is that testing capability in their local area before they make decisions about reopening.
Social distancing will have to continue at some level because we're all waiting for this vaccine, which again will take at least a year, year and a half to be developed. And that's pretty quick compared to vaccines in the past. But let's talk more, Alice, about some of these other tools that you mentioned, more widespread testing. But there's other ways that health officials can help contain the spread of this virus through contact tracing. Tell us more about that.
Right. So testing doesn't happen on its own. Just knowing who is infected and where the infections are isn't enough. You also have to be able to have some kind of program in place where you can make sure that those individuals who are positive are self-isolating and put in some kind of situation where they may not be transmitting the virus to others. So contact tracing is key to that. And that this is really a very basic public health epidemiological practice where if you do find someone who is positive, someone does test positive, you then ask that person where he or she has been. Who were they in contact with? Who were their closest contacts? These are most likely family members, friends, potentially colleagues at work, so that you can then reach out to those people and test them and understand whether they are positive or not. And so if you think about this, this is more kind of like a ring approach where you widen your ring gradually to include as many people as you can who might have been in contact with someone who's positive until you get to the point where you aren't finding any more people who are positive. And that gives you some reassurance that you have potentially identified anyone whom that individual might have infected.
With contact tracing, in Connecticut, local health districts have been underfunded. I imagine that's probably a scenario that's happened in other states, Alice. And so when we're talking about contact tracing, having the right amount of people to go out into the community, at the same time, it's a voluntary program, right? So how do you get people to want to participate and also find people that are able to track?
This is a combination, you're absolutely right. It's a combination of both asking people to provide the information, of where they've been. This kind of goes against a lot of what we hold dear here in the United States as far as our privacy. But this is something that public health experts are really well trained to do. So when we talk about people who are going to be conducting this contact tracing, they will be well-trained individuals who are educated and in many cases certified to do this. And they have ways of being able to go to people both door to door as well as contact them now electronically to try to help elicit this information. And there are many programs right now around the United States that are aiming to educate and train more people to conduct this type of contact tracing, because as you can imagine, it's not going to be easy.
You're hearing on Zoom here on Where We Live, Alice Park. She's national health correspondent for Time Magazine, as we talk more about her recent story about the questions that officials in local government, state government across our country have to ask before reopening. Here in Connecticut, our governor's closure order expires May 20th. There has been talk about having some restaurants maybe open, outdoor seating, maybe hair salons opening, but the guidelines for how to do that safely still haven't been figured out yet. Alice, again, when we're talking about essentially hiding from this virus, through the social distancing, physical distancing, as we wait for a vaccine. When people are vaccinated, that helps herd immunity. But until then, what do we know about some of the treatments that are out there that may help people who are trying to recover from the coronavirus?
Well, there are a bunch of studies going on looking at different types of treatments for treating COVID-19. I think the most exciting right now, and that's made a lot of news, is a drug called remdesivir. This is something that is not approved for treating any other disease. It's still an experimental drug that was being studied actually for another viral infection known as Ebola. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that the developers, the drug makers, knew that in the lab, at least, this experimental drug also showed some activity against coronaviruses like SARS and MERS. And of course, COVID-19 is caused by a coronavirus. So there's a lot of excitement now and studies going on conducted by the National Institutes of Health and around the world as well. And most recently, there's been some encouraging news suggesting that people who are taking the drug do seem to improve more quickly than those who are given a placebo. It's still early, the full results haven't come out yet, but it's very encouraging. And it was enough for the US Food and Drug Administration, which is a regulatory agency that oversees drugs, to issue what they call an emergency use authorization, which means the drug is not fully approved, but given this emergency situation that we have for COVID-19, doctors can ask for it and give patients this drug called remdesivir on a case-by-case basis. So it's promising, it's exciting, but we'll have to see as more people get the drug, how well and what kind of effect it might have on the disease. There are other treatments that are also looking at not tackling the virus itself, but attacking some of the symptoms that occur during infection. So one of the major issues with COVID-19 are respiratory problems that occur as the disease advances. And that's really caused by kind of an overactive immune system, when the body's immune system sees a virus and really revs up and causes what they call a cytokine storm. So it's a really revved up and hyper activated immune response. And there are a lot of interesting studies looking at drugs that can really suppress that response and potentially lessen the course of the disease.
Alice, we've been hearing also in our state, our governor and others talking about antibody or serological testing to find out who's had COVID-19 and when they've recovered, how much of that gives them an immunity. What do we know about those antibody tests?
So the antibody tests are different from the tests that are used to detect active infection. The tests that are used to detect active infection are actually looking for traces of the virus's genetic signatures. And the antibody tests are looking for the body's response to the virus. So it's looking for those antibodies that the immune system generates to fight the virus. So that if you test positive on an antibody test, that tells you that you have either recently been infected or have at some point in the past been infected. It's not clear yet what those antibodies mean. So the studies are still ongoing to understand how protective those antibodies are. Does that mean that if you have them and you get exposed again to the virus, you won't get infected? Not clear. We don't know the answer to that, and researchers are really working hard to try to understand better what those antibodies mean. But in the meantime, they are also being looked at as a potential treatment. You might have heard about some of these plasma-based treatments where people who have recovered from COVID-19 infections are donating their plasma, and the antibodies that they have generated are being infused into patients to see if it could help them also to lessen the course of their disease.
So just because these antibody tests are out there and showing that some people may have some antibodies against COVID-19, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone can get herd immunity pre-vaccine. It's still too early to say.
Too early to say, and I think the idea of saying, if you think about it, there's really, and Dr. Fauci put this so well, there's two ways of getting this herd immunity. One is to get infected and to recover and have your body generate the natural immune response to it. However, that's not realistic or advisable, since this disease is also quite lethal and it can cause some very serious complications. So right now, we're looking still at a very, very small percentage of people who have been infected with the virus and then recovered. So I don't think that's the way that we're going to look at for getting herd immunity. The vaccine is really going to be the more sustainable and longer term solution to that.
And given all of what we've discussed, Alice, as states look to reopening, it's really going to have to go from a hyper-local level, like what's happening within a certain community. And if certain things are reopened and more cases develop, more hospitalizations, they may have to tamp that down.
They will. It's going to be a trial by error, I think, and that's where testing is going to be key, because testing will help you to determine, are there going to be flare-ups, where those flare-ups are, and also help you to isolate those individuals who are infected so that it doesn't spread further. The whole idea as communities reopen is to keep those flare-ups and the clusters of cases as small as possible.
You've been hearing Alice Park, again, national health correspondent for Time magazine. We'll tweet out a link to her recent story about, again, the questions that state officials should be asking when you consider what public health officials have been saying about containing COVID-19. Alice, thank you so much for joining us here on Where We Live.
My pleasure.
This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up, schools in Connecticut will remain closed through June 30th. We're going to talk with the leader of Connecticut's largest teachers union about that decision, and the state education commissioner will join us too. Now, what questions do you have for them? Are you a parent or a local school teacher, a local principal? Join the conversation. 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Most parents were expecting the news. On Tuesday, Governor Lamont announced schools will remain closed for the rest of the academic year. Our family is prepared for another 2 months of distance learning. And how are educators preparing for the eventual reopening of schools in the fall? You can join our conversation, 888-720-WNPR. That's 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Joining us now on Zoom is Jeff Leake. He's president of the Connecticut Education Association, the largest teachers union in Connecticut. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you had written an op-ed before Governor Lamont again announced the schools will be closed up through June 30th. So what was your reaction when you heard the news, and what have you been hearing from your members?
My members were extremely gratified by the governor's decision. They were anxious about when we were going to come to that decision, but we were thinking it was absolutely the right decision. Our teachers took the decision probably in two ways. One, a little disappointed that, sometime in March was their last personal interaction with their students, but certainly understanding that for safety reasons, and again, going back to the earlier part of the show, we're happy that, we're going to take some time to figure out how we get moving forward.
Again, another 2 months of distance learning. Before we talk about what that means for parents and students, Commissioner Cardona will be joining us in just a few minutes. I wanted to talk more about as we're looking to the future, because eventually everyone wants to see schools reopen. You went through some of the things that need to happen when schools reopen. Can you walk us through what school may look like in the fall, given what we're thinking about safety, social distancing, cleaning, again, keeping both students and teachers safe?
Absolutely. We are concerned that at this moment, not all of our schools in Connecticut, perhaps some are, not all of our schools in Connecticut would be ready to open. And we want to make sure that over the next couple of months that happens. So the cleaning issue is clearly one. We've had issues with healthy schools, or unhealthy schools, I should say, for the past few years. We've had it as something we've been talking about with legislators. So the cleaning is very important to us. Then there's the issue of protective gear for both students and teachers. Who's going to supply the mask? Do we need to wear gloves? Is that something that needs to take place? And then there's the issue, clearly, schools in some ways are too similar to cruise ships, i.e. a lot of people getting together, very close to one another, eating together, all those things. We need to make sure that teachers, administrators, and yes, parents too, are part of the conversation about how we're going to be able to move forward come September.
So let's break down that a little bit more, Jeff Leake. Again, when we think about all the students that are in a particular school building, does that mean you may see staggered class times? Are we going to start seeing, instead of a full day of school, maybe a half day of school because you want to limit the number of students in a building at one time?
We hope that that's part of the conversation. We know that that complicates things. Clearly, schools are part of our whole economic engine in Connecticut and across the nation. We understand that parents of our school children need to be probably getting back to work as well. Who's going to take care of those kids if we don't have them in school every day? But the true issue again is, how can we make this happen and make sure that we don't spread this virus, we don't make it worse. I think for us, the worst thing that could happen would be that we open in September, and as your previous guest just said, when places have reopened in other countries, all of a sudden we see a spike in this virus. So we want to make sure that we don't reopen schools, see a spike, and then have to quickly close again. That's what we're concerned about. We want to be part of that conversation.
You can join our conversation here on Where We Live. My guest on Zoom, Jeff Leake, president of the Connecticut Education Association, the largest teachers union in Connecticut. Here's the number to call in, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Sky's calling from Cheshire. Sky, you're on the show.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I had a question. So what is the hope, I guess, in keeping schools closed, and what is that impact going to be when we have all of the parents returning to work and we have summer camps opening?
Thank you, Sky, for that question. That is a big question, Jeff Leake, because even if we want to keep schools closed and students and teachers safe, a lot of parents may be working at places that they have reopened. They need to go back to work, and so what conversations are happening between your organization and state officials and the commissioners about this gap in providing care for students?
So we have members on the reopen task force that Governor Lamont began, and also on the regional ones that are out there. We're hoping that those conversations are taking place. We are looking for guidance for those. We know that not every school district and not every region probably will have to have the same kind of protocols in place, but we want to make sure that, again, we're part of that conversation. Please understand, our teachers want to get back into contact with their students, and we understand that parents need to work. But again, we don't want to just kind of reopen as we were before and perhaps make things worse. We've contained this to some extent. We're on the right trajectory. We want to make sure we stay on that trajectory and do not restart anything that we were hoping to stop by closing schools in the first place.
You can join our conversation again, 888-720-WNPR. That's 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. When we think about distance learning, there were some hiccups in terms of certain districts didn't have the right equipment to send out to kids who may not have computers at home, or the fact that all these teachers had to quickly shift, Jeff, to thinking about how do we connect with our students online and help them retain what they've learned. What have you been hearing from your teachers about the workload? Because their kids are home too.
Yeah, the workload is one interesting topic when we talk to our members. Many of them are working way beyond what they ever were doing before, starting at 7 o'clock in the morning and ending at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And some of them, of course, are dealing with their own children at home, their own children needing help from mom and dad to get their lessons done. So it's been an interesting journey. I just send out my absolute thanks for all the ways that our teachers have been out there working with parents, working with their students as best they can to get this done. But you've hit on a very important point, which is the discrepancy of resources that are available from one community to the next in Connecticut. Some of our folks had already done some training. They were already thinking about some distance learning opportunities, but others clearly were nowhere near there and are still having trouble trying to figure out how to make it happen to the best of their ability.
When we talk about educational equity, even the thought that, say, schools reopen and certain districts may have more resources and more room to have, say, different spacing for lunchtime and classrooms, seating, but then, or even having adequate PPE or cleaning, but then other districts not having that. And then you might see a flare-ups in these infections. I mean, it's very problematic, Jeff, and you can understand the anxiety that people are feeling about all of this.
We certainly understand it, and we certainly want to work with everyone, including the State Department of Education, parents, administrators, to try to figure out how we can restart school in whatever way it needs to be restarted.
Joining us now on Zoom is Dr. Miguel Cardona. He's Commissioner of the Connecticut State Department of Education. Dr. Cardona, welcome back to the show.
Hi, good morning. Glad to be here.
So we've been talking with Jeff Leake, president of the Connecticut Education Association, about what he and his members would like to see for supporting teachers and students. But from your perspective, Dr. Cardona, this decision to keep schools closed through June 30th, it wasn't a surprise for many. But did you hear from other districts who maybe be on the eastern side of the state who thought, maybe we could go back for the remainder of the year? How did you come to the decision that you did?
Sure. As you said, it wasn't surprising, but as one former student of mine put it, it wasn't surprising, but it was still devastating. It was still difficult to kind of wrap your head around the fact that we wouldn't be going back into our schoolhouses. We wouldn't be going back to those things that we value so much, those experiences and traditions that we hold close to our hearts. I did speak to superintendents throughout different parts of the state, and there was still reservation with regard to bringing students back because we know staff members, travel from different parts of the state. So it's not like the school community is made up of only people that live in that community. So there was still some considerable reservation about reopening too early.
Robert's calling from Avon. Robert, what's your question for the Commissioner Cardona or Jeff Leake?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm curious to what degree the decisions in Connecticut about how and when to reopen the schools are influenced by decisions being made on that topic in New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts. Are we in communication with the school commissioners in those states? Do we just sort of watch their decisions from afar? How does that work?
Thank you, Robert. Dr. Cardona.
Thank you for the question, Robert. I'm in communication with the entire Council of Chief School State Officers. So there's the 50 commissioners from throughout the country. We have calls twice a week to discuss topics. I have been in communication with the commissioners of the surrounding states. And I think our decision is really based a little bit more on the context of Connecticut and the trends in Connecticut, but we do have conversations about what they're planning. Rhode Island let me know when they were planning on closing down. And we have similar situations and we bounce ideas off each other. But the decision ultimately rests on the governor for the state. And, we inform the governor what our recommendations are.
We should mention, I think you mentioned this the other day, Dr. Cardona, wasn't Connecticut like the 40th or 46th state to make this announcement that they too would close through the end of the year?
Yes, I believe it was 46th.
Yeah. So Connecticut took its time.
Right.
Well, I wanted to go back to some of the points that Jeff Leake raised about, again, we've got another 2 months of distance learning, but everyone is hopefully crossing their fingers that school will eventually reopen in the fall. When we think about reopening school, some of the things that how school will change from the schedule that many of us are used to, staggered start times being one of them, maybe changing up how a school building is used so you have less students in a particular class. classroom. How are you coming up with these kinds of options? How are you talking through with the many school districts that we have in our state, Dr. Cardona, to come up with a way to make it safe?
Thank you. We're fortunate to have an education subcommittee that has perspectives from different parts of the education sphere, right? But we're also benefiting from what we established at the department. It's called a regional education advisory team. So there are 6 regional advisory teams from different parts of the state that have members. They have teachers, superintendents, parents, other educators on the team to come up with strategies. And they've recently submitted a survey that was done, a thought exchange survey that got over 30,000 responses to try to bring forward some of the best ideas. We also have, we're doing landscape analysis of what some of the best strategies are, not only nationally, but internationally, to try to see what options exist. And then ultimately, those are going to be called into the best practices by the Education Reopen Committee for communication to districts. So they can consider how that works in their communities. But keep in mind, Connecticut, even though it's a small state, we have such variance in what some of our school experiences are. So for example, I spoke to a superintendent last week who has a high school of 200 students. Yeah. I visited Danbury High School about 2 months ago, and they have 3,000 students. So it's going to look different in different places to some extent. So we're going to provide some opportunities for districts to see what works for them while trying to guide them and make sure that the health standards are clear throughout the state.
But how do you get this all done, Dr. Cardona? Because again, schools had to shift quickly to online learning. I know the Current reported, I think last week, there are many school districts that are having trouble connecting with students to see if they're even able to do their online work, or maybe they're not doing it. And so we're very into the present day. How do we get to the next day, and then thinking about what's going to happen this summer, and then trying to keep it safe in the fall? I mean, it's a lot to deal with, and I'm just wondering how you're able to do that effectively.
It is a lot to deal with, but as I said earlier, we have a strong team at the State Department of Education. We have strong partners, Jeff being one of them. We have committed educators throughout the state of Connecticut that are rolling up their sleeves and working with us to try to identify best distance learning practices or sharing best ideas. I mean, if you go on the State Department of Education website now, you'll see over 30 to 40 webinars that were created to support districts. And what we're noticing now is districts are sharing best practices, and we're highlighting it, and we're giving them a platform to share with other districts. So it really is a community of one in education, I'd like to think. And so it doesn't bottleneck with one person. It really is different people coming in with different ideas. Distance learning, we need to continue to improve that. As much as I want to say that on September 1st, all students are going to go back to school, the reality is that's going to be very dependent on the health patterns, the health trends. And we have to be prepared. If there is an outbreak, some suggest that there could be a second wave, that we are able to safely close schools again. So I'm hoping that if that does happen, our second wave of distance learning or remote learning is better than our first. And we have to continue to work on connectivity. We have to continue to work on providing devices for students. And we have to continue to work on making sure that the materials that we provide for our students and our teachers are quality, so that they're not having to reinvent the wheel. They have enough to deal with teaching with their own children at home for us to ask them to start making things up as they go along.
You can join our conversation with Dr. Miguel Cardona, Commissioner of the Connecticut State Department of Education. Also with us on Zoom, Jeff Leake, President of the Connecticut Education Association, the largest teachers union in the state. The number to call, 888-720-WNPR. That's 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. You mentioned support for teachers, support for students. What can school districts do better in terms of supporting parents through all of this, Dr. Cardona? Many parents who still have to work.
Yes, parents have become in some ways de facto teachers' assistants at home too. it's been challenging. We're actually developing a webinar for families and for parents. When I'm done with this call, I have to participate in developing a video for that, just to kind of guide some guidance for parents and some tips on, just pacing yourselves and not feeling the immense pressure to have the student replicate what they were doing before COVID-19. That's sometimes the pressure that many students or many families are feeling, that they have to do exactly what was being done prior to COVID-19. No, this is not a long-term solution to education. Right now, what we're trying to do is provide some stopgaps so that students are accessing learning and doing so in a way that keeps them going. But we understand that we can't expect parents to be their classroom teachers, nor can we think that parents who have to work are able to do that. So we want to just share that information with families. We plan on doing that through some webinar conference that we'll make available on our website very soon.
We're going to continue our conversation here on Where We Live in just a couple of minutes. You can join us as well. 888-720-WNPR. That's 888-720-9677. Again, my guest today, Dr. Miguel Cardona, Connecticut's Commissioner of the State Department of Education, and Jeff Leake, President of the Connecticut Education Association. If you're a parent, educator, you can join us as well. We'll be right back after a short break. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. With us today on Zoom, Jeff Leake, President of the Connecticut Education Association, the largest teachers union in our state. Also, Dr. Miguel Cardona, Commissioner of the Connecticut State Department of Education. If you have a question for them, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. I wanted to ask you, Dr. Cardona, we know that there's an issue with achievement gap and educational disparities in our state. When we think about, again, all of these different school districts and different income levels, different resources, is the State Department of Ed thinking about a way to measure the learning that will be lost because of the pandemic?
We'll get to that, assessing where the students are eventually to try to best identify how to appropriate resources and supports. Right now, it's really about trying to give access to students. I think as we get into some routine and cadence back into the school year, it's important to see what our students lost so that we could accelerate any learning recovery that needs to happen. It helps us identify also the important work that we continue to have to make sure that equity and access undergirds everything that we do as an agency and as a state.
Jeff Leake, I wanted to get your response to that question, because I'm sure teachers, a lot of pressure on them to help students get to a certain learning level, and how that's really been, just thrown to the wind because everyone's dealing with this situation in different places remotely. How do you respond to how teachers should think about learning loss when students eventually come back to school?
So I think we are very interested in trying to figure that out and trying to say, okay, here's what we need to do in order to continue this year. For example, I spent much of my time in the elementary school. I taught 5th and 6th grade. If I was a 6th grade teacher now, and I got my new students from 5th grade in September, the first thing I would begin to do was to kind of figure out where they are, what they got that they normally would get, but then also what is missing, should I say. So for us, we're very interested in trying to say, okay, we need to figure out where students are right now, and then we need to adjust. Again, going back to my experience as a 6th grade teacher, I wouldn't expect that I would begin this coming school year the same way I began all my others, because students although they've been hopefully participating, do not have all of the instruction that they normally would get between March and June. So it's a very important concept. We hope that folks don't think that, for example, administering a standardized test to the entire student population in Connecticut is going to tell us too much, because it's not. This is going to have to be done by teachers working with their colleagues, trying to say, okay, what's the best assessment for our students? How can we figure out where they are? How can we move forward with instruction that benefits them?
Looking at some of the different ways schools could get back into session this fall, we had an educator from the Yukon School of Ed on the other week, and she mentioned looping, this idea that because students have missed 3 months of their grade, would school districts be able to get some consistency where kids could go back to school and they have that same teacher? Is that something that could be looked at?
I think it is looked at right now in some situations, mostly in the early elementary grades. I'm not sure personally, and our teachers seem to be responding as well with this, that it's the solution that we can look at going forward. For example, at going back to my own experience, I, as a sixth grade teacher, might not be remembering what needs to be done with students from the grade before. We think it's best to kind of move students along and have teachers teaching what they are comfortable with, what they know, and what they're ready to move forward with, especially as they begin to develop some additional concepts regarding distance learning.
Before we get to the fall, there's summer. And Dr. Miguel Cardona, I'm wondering, I believe you've mentioned that there may be instances of summer school. Can you talk us through how that would work and where you would see the need for that?
Sure. So the goal is to provide safe opportunities for students to re-engage in learning, especially students who have whose experience with distance learning doesn't really have as much of an impact on their ability to continue the skills. I'm thinking about students with special needs or students that have summer programming so that their skills don't regress even further. I get emails from families and parents that have children with autism, and the importance of maintaining some routine and structure for these students is critically important. So we are planning with the Reopen Committee to discuss what it looks like, how to maintain safety and health while we reopen our schools. And we hope to have something ready for the governor later this month. We're thinking in the next couple of weeks, we want to have some guidance for summer schools so that schools could potentially reopen this summer in small numbers to get students back in. Keeping in mind that any reopening plan must also have part of it a phase down plan if it's unsafe to continue. But we do plan on looking at summer school as an option for the students in Connecticut. It wouldn't be for all students, but it would be for students that the district deems to be the highest priority for returning.
When we talk about discussions that you and others are having with the governor, how do you bring up the importance of extra funding that will be needed to help these school districts, whether it's summer school or if they decide in the fall, maybe there's going to be extended school days or ways to help students catch up? We know that local towns and cities are already stretched pretty thin dealing with pandemic response. So how much will this all cost, Dr. Cardona?
Right. I want to be sensitive to the realities in communities. Tax revenue, contingency funds have all been used to combat this pandemic that we're all facing. And we all have to be a part of a team. With that said, I want to make sure that we don't lose the opportunity to communicate the importance of the fact that our students need more. Our kids need more, not less, right? So when we're thinking about, stimulus packages and we're thinking about making sure that certain sectors don't fall under, we have to think the same way about education. We have to think the same way about education because we know education serves as a foundation for a lot of the success of a community. We have to make sure that when we have funding that's earmarked for education and CARES Act funding, for example, that we're talking about getting more laptops or devices in the hands of kids. We're talking about improving connectivity. We're talking about giving social emotional support and maybe more access to social workers, because, as you know, some of the students that are coming back are going to be coming back after having experienced major trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be available to support the students with their needs as they come into our building. So the equity and access argument has never needed to be louder than it is today.
We just have a few minutes left. Judy on Facebook writes, New York Governor Cuomo has been talking about partnering with Bill Gates for the future of education. She wants to know, Dr. Cardona, are you guys thinking about this in Connecticut? I know that there is philanthropic efforts to get laptops to students, but other ways of helping fund education that's going to have a lot more challenges before us.
Right. Yeah, we remain focused on the goals to provide quality public education in Connecticut. And we have seen in Connecticut some tremendous private public partnerships. And folks in Connecticut have stepped up to support it. As far as any specific plan to partner with one versus another, we're not there in Connecticut, but we are working with partners in philanthropy who are supporting the overall goals of the agency and of our state. And their help is greatly appreciated during this time of need.
Jeff Leake, president of the Connecticut Education Association, I wanted you to chime in on the question about additional resources for school districts. Your members represent teachers and staff from all over the state, whether it's a wealthy school district or not. Is there a real concern that the state won't be able to help fund some of the challenges moving forward?
Absolutely, there is. And we are trying to have our members initiate conversations with our local leaders, as well as state legislators and so forth, to say, as the commissioner just said, when we reopen in September, we're probably going to need more resources than we had before. And I especially want to kind of chime in on the idea that social emotional support is probably going to be as important as instructional support. And we want to make sure that it's there. Our national organization is working with folks in Washington, D.C., trying to move forward something like, again, the CARES package, but certainly targeted right on education. We need, again, billions of dollars probably to make sure that districts and states across our United States have the money they need in order to make sure that the resources are there for our students. We are going to need more resources, not less. And somehow we got to figure out how to get that funding for those resources for our students.
Dr. Cardona, before we run out of time, a caller earlier asked how the state's going to navigate daycare options when parents have to go back to work, but their students may still be at home. Tell us just briefly, I know you've been collaborating with the Commissioner of Early Education, Beth Bai. What can parents look to in the next couple of weeks with more guidance on daycare options?
Right. The daycares have not stopped since this started. We had many healthcare workers and first responders who have children have an immediate need for care options for their youngsters. And that's only going to increase as we start reopening Connecticut slowly and people have to get back to work. So those efforts are still underway. As you mentioned, Commissioner Bai has been doing yeoman's work, maintaining safety standards, communicating with those centers. And, as the summer progresses and camps are available too, parents are going to have some other options as well.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Miguel Cardona for joining us here on Where We Live. He's the Commissioner of the State Department of Education. Dr. Cardona, thank you.
Thank you for your time, for the invitation, and for the advocacy on behalf of the education in Connecticut. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. And also Jeff Leake, president of the Connecticut Education Association. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us on Where We Live. This programming note, we're going to have Governor Ned Lamont join us again on Monday on Where We Live. And tomorrow we're going to have Jerica Brown on Where We Live, winner of this year's Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. I hope you join us for that conversation. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today's show produced by Carmen Baskoff. Thanks for listening.